I adjusted my coat as I stepped onto S13th Street in downtown Philadelphia. The winter air bit at my skin. The restaurant, the Market Grill, was right across the street, a warm glow spilling onto the sidewalk. I had chosen it carefully, elegant enough for the occasion, but not pretentious. Tonight was my dad's 60th birthday, and I had planned every detail to make it unforgettable. The hostess led me to the private room I'd reserved, a corner space with high brick walls and soft lighting. Fresh flowers were arranged in the center of the long table, the kind my dad loved. Dark red carnations mixed with sprigs of pine. I'd come early, wanting to confirm the wine selection, the dessert, even the placement of the chairs. Everything had to be perfect. For years, I had been the one holding this family together, though no one seemed to care. From my small apartment in Baltimore, I had made transfers for medical bills, truck repairs, tuition payments, even for the roof over their heads. I told myself it was love. Staying meant I belonged. But there was always a part of me that wondered if I was just buying a seat at the table. Tonight, I wanted no doubts. Tonight, my dad would smile, my mom would soften, and my brothers would remember I was more than just the sister who paid. I wanted us to feel like a family again, if only for a few hours. I took a small velvet box from my purse and placed it discreetly by my plate. Inside was the watch my dad had once admired through a jewelry store window. Its navy blue face gleamed under the lights. It had cost more than I'd budgeted, but I didn't care. He deserved something beautiful after the year he'd endured. As I adjusted the silverware one last time, I heard laughter echoing from the restaurant entrance. My family had arrived, and with them, the start of a night I would never forget. Growing up in Philly meant my world stretched from the winding roads leading toward the Poconos to the cracked sidewalks of our neighborhood. But inside our house, everything revolved around my two brothers. Christian, 3 years older, was the golden boy. Tall, broad-shouldered, and gifted on the football field. He wore my mother's pride like a crown. She would brag about his touchdowns to anyone who would listen, as if his victories were her own. Then there was Austin, 2 years younger, quick-witted and always forgiven. He had a way of turning mistakes into stories that made everyone laugh. Teachers overlooked his half-finished homework, and my mom excused every late night and broken rule with a shake of her head and a soft smile. And then there was me. I was just Victoria. Quiet, diligent, more at home in the library than on a field or a stage. My report cards came back with perfect grades, but my achievements always received lukewarm praise compared to my brothers. "She's smart," my mom would say, "but not a natural leader like Christian." Or, "Oh, she's focused, but Austin has so much charm." Every "but" left a mark. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, I was 15. I watched my parents whisper over bills at the kitchen table, my dad's hands rough and restless from construction jobs that no longer paid enough, my mom's face etched with new lines of worry. That was the year I stopped dreaming small. While Christian talked about scholarships and Austin drifted toward music, I decided I would study finance. Numbers, at least, didn't play favorites. I started working part-time at a diner after school, saving every dollar. I believed that if I could help shoulder the weight crushing our family, then maybe, finally, I would be more than the overlooked daughter. The sound of approaching footsteps brought me back to the present, and I braced myself as my family filled the room. At NYU in New York City, I thought I'd finally stepped into a life of my own. I had earned a scholarship that covered tuition and books. Between tutoring first-year economics students and interning at a local brokerage firm, I kept myself afloat. My roommate spent her weekends hitting the bars in the West Village, but I worked late in the library convincing myself that discipline was the key to freedom. The first call came during my junior year. My dad's truck, the one he needed for jobs, had broken down. The shop in Philly quoted him $1,200, money he didn't have. "It's okay if you can't," he said over the phone. But I made the transfer that night, putting off buying a few textbooks I needed. 2 months later, my mom called about an unexpected medical bill. This time it was $800. "We'll pay you back," she promised. They never did. Then Austin needed tuition to stay enrolled at a private university. $9,000. I covered that too, telling myself that family came first. By my senior year, nearly half of what I earned from my internship was going back home. After graduation, when I landed a job as a financial analyst in Baltimore with a decent starting salary, I thought things would settle down. Instead, the requests multiplied. When my dad's chest pains ended in surgery, the bills were brutal. Insurance covered a portion, but nowhere near enough. I emptied my savings, nearly $40,000, and still had to take out a personal loan. Then I helped with the mortgage, $24,000 spread over 2 years to keep them from falling into default. Add to that Austin's school and Christian's truck when the finance company repossessed it, and I barely noticed how quickly the numbers piled up. I lived in a studio apartment furnished with second-hand chairs, drove a beat-up old Honda, and bought groceries in bulk to stretch every paycheck. Meanwhile, family dinners and new appliances appeared whenever I visited Philly. I told myself it was temporary, that my sacrifices meant they needed me, maybe even loved me. But the truth was something else. I had become something different. The family ATM. The restaurant's murmur quieted as my family entered, their coats brushed by the cold street air. I stood to greet them, hugging my dad first. He looked well. The color had returned to his cheeks after last year's surgery. His sport coat, the one I'd bought him for Christmas, fit him perfectly across the shoulders. For a moment, that image alone made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. We settled around the table. Menus were passed, candles flickered against the brick. The waiter brought the Napa Valley Cabernet I'd ordered, and my dad's eyes lit up when he recognized the label. "My favorite," he said, patting my shoulder. I smiled, saying nothing about the bottle costing $160. Tonight wasn't about numbers. When it was time for gifts, I waited for the others to go first. Christian handed over a polo shirt and a book on woodworking. Austin slid a framed photo from a fishing trip last summer across the table. Both gifts were simple, thoughtful in their own way, and my dad thanked them warmly. Then I picked up the velvet box beside me. "This is from me," I said, pushing it across the linen. My dad opened it slowly, and as the Omega caught the light, his breath caught too. It was the same watch he'd once admired in a jewelry store window at the King of Prussia Mall, pausing just long enough for me to remember. "Victoria," he whispered, his voice thick and his eyes shining as I fastened the strap around his wrist. "It's perfect." For that brief second, I felt like I belonged. But as I looked up, Christian's smile was strained, his eyes fixed on the watch with a shadow I knew too well. Austin let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "That must have cost a fortune," he muttered, half joke, half something else. Across the table, my mother's expression hardened. Her lips tightened. In her eyes was not pride or gratitude, but something colder, sharper, waiting for its turn to strike. The first comment slid in so smoothly, I almost convinced myself I'd misheard it. We had just ordered appetizers when my mom leaned back in her chair with a tight smile as the waiter walked away. "Not everyone can afford places like this," she said, looking at me. "But I guess when you're single with no responsibilities, it's easy to be generous." Christian chuckled, raising his glass. Austin joined in with a low laugh, as if it were all an innocent joke. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but forced myself to take a sip of wine instead of responding. My dad tried to redirect the moment, reminiscing about one of his old job sites, but it wasn't long before my mom struck again. "Victoria, you must be working 60 hours a week to support your lifestyle. No wonder you don't have time for a real life." She paused, letting the words hang like smoke. "Some people get so obsessed with money they forget about warmth." Christian leaned toward Austin. "Remember when she used to make spreadsheets for her allowance?" he said, laughing. "She was 10 going on 40. Austin was still smiling. "Only now the spreadsheets are probably for her bank account." I clenched my hands under the table, my nails digging into my palms. My dad cleared his throat, speaking louder than necessary about his favorite woodworking project, but his voice was lost under their laughter. The memory of my recent breakup flickered in my mind, and before I could push it away, my mother delivered the next blow. Sean was right. A man doesn't want to be competing with numbers and deadlines forever. The words cut deeper than she could have known. The breakup was still raw, and hearing his name weaponized at this table made me feel dizzy. The candles flickered against the brick, shadows stretching across their faces. I wondered if anyone else in the restaurant could feel the shift at our table, the subtle cruelty disguised as banter, the ease with which my family turned me into a punchline. Each laugh from my brothers, each sidelong glance from my mother felt like another incision. And as I sat there, a tight smile plastered on my face, swallowing the burn, I knew the cuts were drawing blood. By the time the main courses were cleared, I felt as though I'd fought a dozen small battles. My dad tried valiantly to keep the mood afloat, telling stories from when he was young. But every time I spoke, my mother found a way to twist it into something sharp. When I mentioned a recent promotion, she smiled with a false sweetness. Of course Victoria is climbing the ladder. She always knows how to buy affection. The words landed like a slap. My fork hovered mid-air. The taste of my food vanished. Christian and Austin gave uncomfortable little chuckles, avoiding my eyes while my dad shook his head. That's enough. This is supposed to be a celebration. But my mother wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her wine glass balanced delicately in her hand. It's true, Roger. All these grand gestures, the expensive dinners, the flashy watch. Victoria's always been good at throwing money around. She thinks it makes her important. A dry laugh escaped her. Then, as if the moment demanded cruelty, she added, "But no matter what she buys, she's not even really part of this family." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The clatter of dishes and the hum of conversations from the main dining room seemed to stop at the door. Even the waiter, approaching with a tray, froze, unsure whether to come closer. The phrase ricocheted in my mind, unraveling years of sacrifice I had worn like armor. I looked at my mother, at the triumphant set of her chin, and then at my dad. He looked devastated, caught between loyalty and disbelief. Christian shifted in his seat, suddenly fascinated by his water glass. Austin's smile had fractured into something closer to fear. My hands were shaking under the table, but I kept my face still, my breathing even. Inside, something cracked open with a silent shearing sound that I knew could never be repaired. I picked up my wine glass, lifting it with a steadiness that surprised even me. The room seemed to tilt, everyone watching, waiting to see if I would cry or argue or storm out. Instead, I gave a small smile, the cold glass against my fingers, and prepared to speak. I raised the glass, the stem steady in my hand, though my pulse was pounding in my ears. My mother's smirk was still there, but I saw a flicker of curiosity in her eyes as I finally spoke. "Perfect," I said evenly, my voice just loud enough to carry across the table. "Then don't ever ask me for money again." The words fell into the silence like a stone. For once, nobody laughed. I set my glass on the table and folded my hands. Let's be honest, shall we? $40,000 for Dad's surgery, $24,000 to cover the mortgage over the last 2 years, $16,000 when Christian's truck was repossessed, $9,000 for Austin's tuition, which he didn't even finish, $4,000 for the new roof, $3,000 to fix the water heater last winter. I watched the numbers land, one by one, each heavier than the last. Austin's smile went hollow. Christian's shoulders slumped as he stared at the tablecloth. My dad looked at me as if I'd struck him, his eyes wide and searching. "And tonight," I added, gesturing to the plates, the wine, the flowers, $700 for this dinner, so Dad could celebrate with the people he loves, paid for by the daughter who, apparently, isn't even part of this family. My mother's face changed in an instant. The triumph drained away into panic. Her lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. She had not expected me to say it aloud, to reveal the silent ledger I had carried for years. The silence around us deepened. Even the staff stopped moving, as if they understood something had irrevocably broken. I lifted my glass again, took a slow sip, and set it down without breaking my gaze. The truth was finally on the table, and it couldn't be taken back. The waiter approached cautiously, his eyes darting between my family and me as if gauging how to navigate the tension. I took my card from the check holder and pressed it firmly into his hand. "Actually," I said, my tone remaining calm, "bring me a separate check, just for me." My dad's head snapped up. "Victoria, no!" But I didn't look at him. I held the waiter's gaze until he nodded and retreated toward the register. The silence that followed was unbearable, broken only by the sound of Christian setting his fork down too loudly. Austin muttered something under his breath, but I didn't bother asking what. When the check came, I signed it quickly, leaving a generous tip. My share. My meal, my wine, nothing more. I stood up, slinging my purse over my shoulder, and let my gaze sweep over the table one last time. Their faces looked smaller now, diminished by the truth they had tried to bury. Outside, the air bit at my skin, the Philadelphia night crisp and cold. I walked past the illuminated facades around City Hall, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. With every step, a sense of relief sank deeper into my bones. For the first time in years, I was not responsible for holding anyone together. By the time I got back to Baltimore, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Voicemails were piling up, my dad pleading for me to call him back, Christian insisting we could fix this, Austin half joking but with panic in his voice. I didn't listen to any of them. Then the last message came through, my mother's voice, thick but firm. "Victoria, I shouldn't have said what I did. But you can't just walk away. We can't make the mortgage without your help. Your father's medical bills aren't finished. The credit cards are maxed out. You know we need you." I set the phone on the counter, its screen dark, her words echoing louder than all the others. It wasn't love she was after. It was survival. The weeks that followed were strangely silent. At first, the messages came daily, my dad explaining they were short on the mortgage, Christian confessing he'd hidden the extent of his financial dependence from his wife, Austin admitting he'd been evicted and was sleeping on a friend's couch. Every call ended the same way, some version of "we need you." But I didn't answer. I couldn't. For once, I chose myself. I booked a solo trip to Key West, something I'd put off for years because there was always another bill, another crisis. The sound of waves against the dark cliffs, the scent of flowers, the sunset spilling over the ocean. It all felt like it belonged to me alone. I read novels on the beach, let the sun warm my skin, and felt my shoulders finally unclench. Back in Baltimore, I returned to work sharper, more focused. My boss noticed, praising my renewed energy and giving me new projects I would have been too exhausted to take on before. I also started therapy, where I said things aloud that I'd never dared to before, that I had been buying love, that my family had mistaken sacrifice for obligation. Meanwhile, without me, they began to adjust. My dad took on consulting work on the side. Old contacts from the construction trade called him for advice. Christian, pressured by his wife, finally created a budget and stuck to it. Austin found a full-time job trading late nights for a steady paycheck. They weren't thriving, but they were surviving, and for the first time, I wasn't the net beneath them. One night in my apartment, my suitcase still half unpacked from the Florida coast, I realized I was free. For the first time in years, my life was truly my own. A year passed before I set foot in Philadelphia again. The call had come from my dad. My mother had suffered a mild heart attack. It wasn't life-threatening, but it forced a pause, a reckoning. Weeks later, I received a letter in her handwriting. 5 pages of raw confession. She admitted her jealousy, her bitterness, the way my independence had made her feel small. Instead of being proud, she wrote, "I resented you. I punished you for succeeding where I felt I had failed." I read it 3 times before I believed it. Time and therapy had softened her, made her words different, less sharp, more human. She didn't ask for money, only for a chance to try again. So when my dad turned 61, I agreed to go. We met at the Market Grill again, the same restaurant where everything had shattered. But this time, there were no barbs, no strained smiles. When the bill came, Christian put his card down first. Austin laid down cash. My dad added what he could. I paid my share, no more, no less. For the first time, I wasn't carrying anyone. As we raised our glasses for a toast, I met my mother's gaze across the table. Her smile was tentative but real, and for the first time, I wasn't looking for hidden thorns. My dad raised his voice over the clink of silverware. "To family," he said. I raised my glass with the others, but the word felt different on my tongue. I wasn't part of this family because of what I contributed. I was part of it because I had demanded to be seen, to be respected, to be loved for who I was.